Okay, Lori, we're here to talk about church budgets, and I brought you on because you are kind of our resident expert on church finances.
Oh boy.
All right. Well, we're going to cover what a church budget is. We got to cover the basics. We're going to talk about why it's essential. We'll even talk about different types of budgets that you can use at your church. And then we'll get into what should be included in a budget and how to create it and everything else. So let's get started.
Let's jump in.
All right. So Lori, you're in the hot seat now. What is a church budget?
A church budget, Matt, is a way for the church to plan income and plan expenses. Again, the plan part is the goal.
Yes, planning is the key.
So that you have a way to determine how you're going to spend the money in a planned, methodical method.
Yeah, it's more than just...
Did you get that? It's a plan.
It's a plan. It's more than just logging into the bank account and seeing what your income and expenses are. It's tracking it. It's like anticipating it over time and then tracking it throughout.
Absolutely.
So why is a budget essential for churches? Because
the church is a business.
Yeah, it's an institution.
It's an institution, and you cannot fly by the seat of your pants. You have to.
We have faith. What about faith, Lori?
That's absolutely wonderful. I have lots of faith, and if I get into a pickle, I ask the Lord to provide outside of what my normal income is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have a plan for the money that He's already provided me.
To borrow from another phrase, faith favors the prepared.
Say that again.
Faith favors the prepared.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
Get it?
There's a quote. There's another quote. Fortune favors the prepared. Faith favors the prepared. Anyway, so there are multiple different types of budgets, though, because when I say budget, we can't just take the concept of a budget for granted. Most of us, when we hear the word budget, we have something very specific in mind. But there's actually different types of budgets, so we need to lay that out and say what we think churches ought to be using.
Okay.
So the first budget type, and I think this is the most common for most churches. Most churches are probably employing a line item budget.
Probably, yes.
And that's where you just lay out all of your streams of income and all of your expenses, and then predict how much you're going to make in that income stream and then how much you're going to spend on that expense. And that's... And
ideally, they balance. They come to a zero at the end so that you're not in the red.
So that you're not in the red. Ideally, it's maybe a little bit positive.
Yeah,
that's
but
okay.
You can plan savings.
You can plan savings. Yes, you can incorporate that. The line item budget is also sometimes called the incremental budget.
Okay.
And that's because typically churches take the budget they used last year and make incremental changes to it for the next year. They just kind of build off of last year's budget for this year.
So Matt, when you are saying incremental, are you talking only financially, or are you talking about actually cleaning up your budget as you go?
No. Typically, and this is something we need to address, a lot of churches just take the budget they made, make some tweaks, and then move on. You just make some tweaks to the numbers in that budget and then move on.
That doesn't seem wise, though.
No, it's not.
Okay.
We'll get into some of the, yes, incremental budget, the line item budget is used by most churches, but we'll get into some of the pitfalls of the incremental budget and what you can do to help with that. The second type is the program budget or the value proposition budget.
Okay.
So instead of looking at the whole big picture, you look at each individual program. So like your kids ministry and your adults ministry and your missionaries. And then you break those down into all of their expenses and you justify those expenses and you try to anticipate them and then also the income. So instead of looking at the entire budget, you break it down into individual pieces and then build up from there. There's also a zero-based budget.
Seems scary to me.
In a zero-based budget, it's a line item budget, but you zero out every single line item and then have each person responsible for that line item justify all the expenses and all of the income and everything. You literally have to take every single thing that is involved in that line item and plan out every single expense and everything you have to buy and then justify it. It's great for some businesses.
I really, really, really want to have heat in the building during the winter, so I have to justify the electric bill.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my.
Yes, absolutely. That's literally what a zero-based budget forces you to do. It's aggressive, very aggressive, probably a little too aggressive for most churches.
That would cause division.
And then the fourth one is called a participatory budget. I always like get tongue twisted on that. Participatory budget. It's like a crowdsourced or member-sourced approach where you call a business meeting and all the members come and you all like discuss and vote on it together as a church rather than just the leaders.
Small church.
In my experience, I have seen churches use this, but they are typically small churches. They are typically very independent churches, like congregational led. It's not typically a top-down structure at the church, more of a bottom-up.
Okay.
It works for those churches.
Okay. I believe you.
Come on, Lori.
I trust you, Matt.
Yeah.
I trust you.
Now, what would you say is the best budget type for at least most churches?
The line item.
Okay.
The line item.
Why though?
Well, because it helps you to plan. It's one item at a time. And when I say line item, Matt, I'm talking about utilities with your subcategories underneath of how you're paying your bills and payroll and church maintenance. I'm not talking about the coffee and the water for the coffee and the creamer for the. We're not getting that base. We're keeping this as in general. I think that would be the best way to do that, and then just keep the plan going.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now we did mention there are some pitfalls.
Yep.
With that budget type, it's not perfect.
Right.
There are some blind spots, and there are ways that we can address those blind spots. But first, before we get into that, let's talk about how to create a budget.
Okay.
So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. So step one for creating a budget, we're just assuming like maybe this is a church plant, this is brand new, or maybe like you're a pastor that's just been brought in, or a treasurer, a secretary that's just been brought in, and you're starting from scratch. Maybe something needs to be changed or something needs to be improved. Our
treasurers and what we see in our line of work is that treasurers do rotate pretty regularly. So this is
for
probably
most churches,
it's
a volunteer.
Right. Exactly.
It's a volunteer doing that.
It's not a paid position.
Right.
So definitely want to give some bolstering in this department.
Yes. So step one when creating a budget is to assess your overall financial position for the church.
And how do they get this information?
So if your church has been around for a while and your accounting has been recorded, if you can generate reports on like past income and past expenses, that's going to be very helpful.
That's going to be the best.
Hopefully the treasurer or the secretary before you has done that. If not, it may take a little work, but it's actually the step one is pretty simple.
I would agree.
There's no like fancy calculations that you're having to run or equations. It's just adding up all of your total assets, adding up all of your total liabilities, like your mortgage if you have one, and your credit cards and whatever other debt that you've got going on at your church. And then like identifying your sources of income. You don't even have to project anything or predict anything right at this step. You're just identifying where money is coming in. And then identify all of your fixed and variable expenses.
Okay.
It sounds complicated, but you're just adding up everything your church owns, what they owe, where money's coming in, and where money's going out. That's it. No equations being run yet. No math has to be done except adding and subtracting. That's it.
If numbers scare you, you probably shouldn't be a treasurer.
You need to pass the baton on to somebody else. Step two, this is easy math now, so don't be intimidated. But step two is calculate your budget baseline.
Okay.
So you've done step one. We're going to take what you did in step one and apply it in step two. All you have to do is add up all of your last year's income and then add up all of last year's expenses and subtract the expenses from the income.
What happens if I'm in the negative?
Well, this equation gives you what's called your net position. Hopefully that's positive. Ideally it's positive. If it's negative, that means you spent more than you took in, and you're digging yourself in a hole, little by little. Or even a lot by a lot in some cases. Then take the net position, so your income minus expenses, take your net position, add last year's income, that's your budget baseline.
Okay.
So that's what you can expect. Like you're taking where you stand now, You're taking last year's income, which you can reasonably expect next year.
Right.
And that's what you have to work with. As long as you continue
to grow, yeah.
That's what you have to work with for next year's budget. That's your baseline.
Okay.
So that's step 2. We've assessed where we are. We've come up with a general prediction of next year's income.
Okay.
Now, step 3 is to start forecasting and predicting. So step 3 is forecasting income and expenses. This is when you're really actually creating a budget.
Okay.
So step 3, you have to anticipate increasing expenses. Even before we started recording, we were talking about like inflation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That happens.
Yeah.
And even church growth.
Absolutely. We're praying for that.
Yeah, we're praying for it. It's there are growth does increase the opportunity for income.
I like how you said that.
Yeah.
The opportunity.
Yeah. The opportunity for income, but it also does bring in other expenses. You will have to spend more on the programs that are growing in order to continue those programs and give them everything that they need. And
continue growth.
Exactly, and to continue growing the church.
You're investing back into your church.
Yeah, and then even like your marketing and your advertising, if you like produce flyers and canvas neighborhoods or advertise on Facebook, if you anticipate growth, you're probably going to have to increase the marketing budget at your church.
I like it.
So just little things like that. Like you have to anticipate the increase in those expenses. You're planning. You also have to project future income. If your church is growing, that's an increase in income. Now, projecting future income it's not tricky, it's not risky, but you do have to be a little careful.
Right. You can't say everybody's going to give XYZ dollars. It doesn't make sense for that.
You can't just anticipate, all right, take last year's number, add 10%, and that's what's going to happen this year.
You might be chancing that one.
Yeah. That's a coin flip. But you also do need to create an emergency fund. Not enough churches have an emergency fund.
Not enough people have an emergency
fund.
Not
enough people have an emergency fund. There's not like a magic number for an emergency fund, what's right for your church, how much to put aside every month. What's recommended is if you don't have an emergency fund right now, like there's $0 in that fund, work towards having at least 3 months of your operating budget set aside, minimum. And then move on to 6 months with the goal of getting to 12 months. That's the absolute ideal for an emergency fund. And then how much to set aside? Anything from 5 to 10 to 15% a month into that until you reach that amount. So that's forecasting your income and expenses. That's step 3. Okay. So we've assessed our position.
Okay.
We've come up with a budget baseline, which is what we can expect for income next year. And we've also forecast some numbers and some income and expenses.
Okay.
Step 4 is prioritizing your expenses.
Pay that electric bill. We like heat.
You have to pay the electric bill. So what I mean by like prioritizing is you as a church leader, whether you're planning the church for the first time, you may not be able to like prioritize expenses very well if you're just getting started because you don't even know what's the priority yet. But you can at least still predict and still make plans.
You should have an idea from life.
Yes. Step 1 for prioritizing expenses. If your church has records of like your accounting in the past, look at the last 3 to 5 years of expenses, and where your church is spending the most money is probably where its priorities are.
There you go.
And that's, generally speaking, that's where you need to focus your attention at your church in terms of your accounting and your budgeting. Those are the things that even in times of economic hardship, you probably won't want to cut those.
Right.
Those are your number 1 priorities. Now, there are exceptions to that. You may just be overspending on some things and you may need to make some cuts. But at the very least, you need to understand and know what is so important to your church that even in times of hardship, you still will maintain as opposed to cutting in other areas.
And you're referring to like not just the essentials of existence, you're talking about ministry-based things. Okay, I just want to clarify that because if somebody's listening, they're thinking, well, of course we're going to pay the electric bill. But I think it's important to realize that what you're doing for the community, what you're doing for Christ, what you're putting out there needs to be prioritized as well.
So so we're not saying you have to cut rent because you have to pay rent.
You have to,
But we're talking about like salaries. We're talking program budgets. We're talking what's costing your church money that if things got really hard and income got tight, you would have to either shave off or even set aside for a little while until things are better. So you have to know what you're willing to continue paying and what you're willing to make cuts in if it came to it.
It seems like COVID would have been a good baseline for this.
Yes. Yeah. That revealed what those were for most churches.
Exactly. That's where my brain was going with
now, we talked about the pitfalls of an incremental budget.
Right.
This is where the pitfalls of an incremental budget really come to the surface.
Right.
And the shortcomings and blind spots. This is also where some of those other budget types can come in handy.
The zero-based budget.
Well, I wouldn't do the zero-based budget, to be honest, just because I don't think like ministries need to fight with each other over
oh, please no.
Who gets the money.
No.
I do recommend, though, that you do your line item budget. Here's the problem with the line item budget. Let's just actually name what those pitfalls and blind spots are. I'm going to coin a term, and it's budget bloat or budgetary bloat. An incremental, the line item budget is also called the incremental budget because oftentimes things,
they just increment across the board and nothing's logical.
Yeah. The line item budget doesn't force church leaders to actually critically assess each line item. And unfortunately, that means that sometimes churches will carry over an expense from one year to the next that if they were to actually look at it, they would maybe realize, well, this isn't actually serving the church anymore. Or we could save some money doing it this way instead. Yeah. And so something like a program budget, do your line item budget. That's what we recommend most churches use because we know that most churches really do need just to build off of last year's budget because most things don't change from one year to the next.
But some things do change.
But do like an informal program budget. That way all of your leaders are having to actually critically assess their own corner of the church and try to justify some of the expenses that come with that. That way you can still assess what your line item budget includes and then make the necessary changes.
I like it.
That way you're not just adding 5% to all of your line items and just slowly blowing that balloon up until it pops. Yeah. So let's talk about what should be included in a church budget.
Okay.
It will be different from one church to the next. Each church will have their own unique needs and expenses and
there
even
are some
income.
Common things, though.
But there are several common things that most churches will need to include in their budget.
Okay.
Step one. The first thing that every church needs to include is income.
Income.
You were talking even before we were recording that for most church budgets, it needs to be based off of what?
How many contributions are coming in. So you can't, and I've seen this over and again with our business, churches will create an expenditure budget, but they don't actually include the income. And I'm like, well, how do you know how much money you can spend if you haven't assessed how much income you have coming in?
Yes.
I mean, that's kind of counterintuitive.
Yes. And so your budget really needs to be based on not your individual ministry funds, but your general fund.
Your general fund, yes.
Because that's where your tithes and offerings go, and that's your main source of income.
Right. Designated contributions can't really be budgeted because you don't know if somebody's going to give over and above their tithe or their offering.
Toward that other thing.
Right, towards that other thing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So those things can't be budgeted or even included in the budget because you don't know.
Yeah.
You can't count on that. So the general fund, tithes and offerings, benevolence, love, even love offerings, that's a kind of a pass-through deal. You really have to have a baseline, what you keep in. You have to pull from your main income into all of those different ministries because that's the only income you can actually count on. Your designated, I like to think of designated donations as like a Christmas bonus. Exactly.
You can't budget all of your gift giving on the Christmas bonus your company is going to give you because maybe they'll do something different. They'll do something else other than the budget or the bonus.
What's that movie with Chevy Chase in it?
Oh, National Lampoon?
Yes. He talks about, he ends up with the jelly of the month.
Yeah.
He was going to build a swimming pool and now he gets the jelly of the month club, and it's like, it just sets him off. So don't count on the jelly of the month club or your, that.
So when you include your income, it has to just be like that budget baseline income, not what you think other people are going to be donating towards specific ministries.
Something else, yeah.
So you can't budget $0 for the youth ministry, expecting parents to donate specifically into that. You need to actually budget for it, and anything your parents give toward the summer camp scholarship, that's just icing on the cake.
It's just gravy.
It's gravy on the biscuit.
Yeah.
So the number 2 thing that you need to include in a budget is personnel. Your personnel expenses. Now,
do pay them.
If you're a church plant, that might be $0. But hey, you know what? That's okay. Like, you still put that in there, because next year maybe it won't. Maybe you'll have grown enough to actually support the pastor. Maybe even maybe even like a children's minister and a music minister and stuff like that. But you need to have your personnel expenses accounted for in your budget.
In your budget, even if it's a $0 line item.
There's also administration costs and operation costs. Those are separate.
Yep, they are.
Operation costs can be like utilities, maintenance, insurance. You got to have insurance.
You got to have insurance.
And then if your church has debt payments.
You can have a church van. You can have a loan,
a building loan.
Yeah.
Even just credit cards.
Even just credit cards.
And then there's outreach costs, because like at churches I've been to, we've had like a little popcorn machine or a hot dog. Yeah, like set up shop outside somewhere with hot dogs and popcorn and cotton candy and snow cones. Like I've been to a church that went ahead and bought all that instead of renting it every time.
Instead of renting it.
And so that's a cost though. Buying the popcorn kernels, buying the hot dogs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you gotta plan for and budget for the cost of actually reaching out to your community.
Which is the goal.
That's the goal. Every church should be doing this. Again, this is what the vast majority of churches need to include in a budget.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also church program costs. Like we were talking about, the youth ministry. You need to put money into the youth ministry and say, here's some money you can use.
You ideally want to grow them continuously. I mean, children's ministries, youth ministries. Mm-hmm. I've seen churches with women's ministries and men's ministries and all kinds of really cool opportunities, but you still need to budget for those.
Those aren't happening magically.
No. And people don't have an endless supply of money, so you can't just assume that they're going to cover all the costs and still continue to pay the tithes and offerings for operations.
Yes. And then there's church growth funds.
Oh, that's a good idea.
That's to build off of both the outreach and the church programs, church growth funds. I think every church needs to have a line item in their budget to accommodate for growing, just to have that aspect of that dynamic of church management covered.
Is that not a vision or what?
Exactly. I really do. I think every church, this is an investment in the future of your church, essentially. And then last but not least,
your emergency fund.
Your emergency fund. Every church needs to have one. Mm-hmm. Again, we had the pandemic. That underscores the need for churches to have the ability to like just keep operating when everything gets turned upside down.
Right. And who would have ever thought that would have happened? But it did.
But it absolutely did.
So
we couldn't have predicted it, but
it did.
It happened. Would you add anything else to this? Is there anything else you think churches need to add to their budget, like every church needs to have? I think we covered all the bases.
I do. I think you covered all the bases, and I don't think. I mean, again, you want to avoid the bloat.
Yeah, you want to avoid the bloat.
Don't anticipate. I mean, with your admin costs, you're covering custodial services and expenses, and like I said, don't break down your categories in your budget to coffee and creamer and butter, and don't do it. Just keep it kind of, sort of.
At the very least, just fold that all into office supplies.
Correct. Yeah. Just so that you have a way to record that and account for it.
Exactly. So now that we're getting into how to create a budget and what to include in a budget, this is the perfect time for church leaders to actually like create goals. Because this is something, again, a budget.
let me just interrupt you for just a second, Matt.
Go ahead.
So when you're talking about a budget, are we talking about like every month you're going to create a budget, or are we talking about an annual picture that gets divided over the course of a year?
So yes, for most churches, you don't need to think monthly. You need to think annually.
Okay.
And then at the very least, at the very best, just use a accounting software that can take that budget and break it down monthly for you.
Okay.
You don't need to think monthly. You need to think annually.
So I'm getting more of a big picture than okay.
But you do still need to track that throughout the year.
Okay.
That's why monthly is beneficial. Even I think it needs to be tracked and monitored monthly, even over like quarterly, because a lot can happen in a quarter.
Oh yeah, and there may be modifications maybe that have to be made to a budget.
Absolutely.
Can that happen?
Well, yes, absolutely. And here's the thing, like if you're just creating a budget, especially for the very first time, most budgets don't work right out of the gate.
That's true, even on a personal level.
Even on a personal level.
Yeah.
You'll lay the groundwork, you'll make all the best plans, the best laid plans.
And then boom, your car breaks down.
Yeah, boom, your car breaks down. So like, I recommend you track things monthly, and quarterly, but don't get discouraged.
Right.
Again, this is going to be a learning lesson your first year. There's going to be a lot of kinks that you work out along the way. So yes, it can be adjusted over time.
Okay, cool.
But we recommend you set goals. And the reason why is because just like how a budget helps a church not take their finances for granted.
Right.
Goals do the same. Creating goals and targets do the same thing.
Right.
Since we're in the gear of creating a budget, let's also take the time to like create targets to hit as a church. To think of where we want to be 3 months from now between not just what kind of income we want to take in, but how we want to pay off our debts. So create short-term goals and long-term goals. So like create a goal for next quarter, 6 months, year, 3 years, 5 years, but then even go further. I think this is where faith really does come into play for church budgets. This is where there's room for faith, and that is to dream big. Go ahead and dream really big in your financial goals. Think of where you want to be 5 years from now financially.
So who gets to make all these decisions?
Well, that's something that when you like create the team at your church. Okay. If you're a finance secretary, or if you're a member of the board, whatever your church leadership structure looks like, I recommend sitting down with the pastor and whoever's in charge of the finance and the board and the elders or whatever your team looks like. Create a team. Okay. That's actually another step we maybe need to include in creating a budget. Step 0 is create a team.
Right. So it's not just one person making all the decisions typically. Okay, cool.
If you're a church planner, it probably is you in the early days.
Well, that's only because the church planner is doing it all.
All
the hats.
Yes. Wearing all the hats. That's understandable, but as soon as possible, get other people on your team. Awesome. And then hand some of these responsibilities off, because the pastor ideally would not be handling the nitty-gritty financial details of the church.
I like it.
But create short and long-term goals for how aggressively you want to pay down your debts. Okay. That's something that a lot of churches, I think, they get a mortgage, they pay the monthly, and they just kind of assume that they're going to be still around 30 years from now. And that's a tough thing to think about.
Well, you better have some serious long-term goals.
Yeah, you got to have long-term goals. You can't just assume where you're going to be 30 years from now. You need to actually plan that out. You may not hit those goals exactly, but having goals makes it just having goals makes it more likely that you're actually going to take the steps to accomplish those goals.
I like it.
So, and then also throughout this entire process, you need to know what your church's mission and vision is, like what your purpose is. Because everything your church does has to be filtered through the mission and vision of your church. If you're doing something that like doesn't actually help you accomplish your mission or see your vision fulfilled, it's a waste of time and it's a waste of money.
Good point. Very good point.
To go back to like critically assessing your budget and knowing when to make cuts. That program that was big 5 years ago that brought a lot of people in, but now no one really participates in.
Right.
It was for a season, and that's okay.
Right.
And that's okay. It helped your church when it was helpful for your church. Now it's time to take the money you're spending on that program and apply it to something else that is also, again, helping your church accomplish its mission. That's just another reason why you have to have that mission and vision in place and have it present as you build your budget, because everything you do has to get you closer to accomplishing that mission.
Okay, cool.
And seeing your vision for the church fulfilled. So then, last but not least, we'll cover some tips. This is just what you need to have and what you need to do as you build your budget, just to make it easy as possible.
Okay.
Tip number 1, communicate. Always talk amongst each other, your leaders, and don't argue. This is all in love, but also communicate this with your members. You need to have a plan in place for how you share the church budget and the business meeting, the vision casting, all of that. Vision casting. Like a lot of churches I've been to, they'll have Vision Sunday sometime in January where they talk about what the vision is for the next year. And they'll also usually share the budget in that meeting too, I found, because it's all tied together. Okay. So communicate, not just amongst each other, but also with the members. Have all of that in place. Have other leaders review before finalizing. So give your different program leaders a chance to have any final say in their corner of the budget. So if you only
actually budget $200 for the youth minister, he really needs to know that before he starts his vision for the future.
Yes. Your program leaders need to know what you've set aside for them so that they can make the plans for what they're going to do that year.
Or not do.
Or not do, exactly. Always involve key stakeholders. You get to decide what those stakeholders are, who they are, but your members, make sure, like we talked about communicating, get them involved. Right. Even if you're not doing the participatory budget where the members create the budget, still talk to them. Because I've been to a lot of churches where the leaders just stand up, they make the pronouncement of what the budget is, and that's just final. Whereas I've seen a lot of other churches, they include the members in some insights and ask them questions along the way to get their perspective on things and their input.
Yeah, that's important.
Always review and revise. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
Always review your work and revise along the way, especially your goals, because you may realize actually that goal wasn't enough of a stretch goal. We hit that really fast. Let's stretch ourselves.
Yeah.
And then also I don't know what we were thinking. There's no way we can hit that goal. You may need to make it more realistic. And then also find a helpful budgeting tool and resource that will walk you through the journey of creating your budget, simplifying that process, and tracking it along the way. We have that in ChurchTrac.
Yes, we do.
If you're subscribed to ChurchTrac and you're on our Plus subscription, we have an accounting tool built right into your ChurchTrac account. I can even show it to you on my computer. We have the accounting screen where you can track all of your income and your expenses. And this is more than just this is more than just your main ministry accounts. Mm-hmm. This is also where you can track all of your liabilities, your not just your expenses, but all of your assets, everything. So everything can be fully recorded in your ChurchTrac account. Mm-hmm. So it's what is it? It's not a double entry. It's a single entry.
It's a cash basis accounting platform.
Yes. Just to get really technical, it's a single entry fund-based accounting system.
Correct.
We built ChurchTrac accounting for
churches.
This is what most churches need to not only know what's in the bank, but where they've allocated those money.
And how we're spending it.
We even included a budget tool. So it's not just
a great budget tool.
It's like we talked about, a budget is more than just logging into your bank account.
Exactly.
Which is what this does too. You can see all of your transactions. But we also have a budget tool built into the accounting system. So you can track all of your income and expenses throughout the year from month to month so that you can keep track of your position at any given time and make sure you're actually achieving your goals, not overspending in critical areas, but also raising enough money to fund everything that you're doing from month to month.
Exactly.
Even whether it's fixed or variable.
It's potentially a monthly financial picture that you can focus on.
Yes. And we have reports that are built into both the accounting tool itself overall and into the budget. You can run budget reports as well to give to your leaders or to your board or to the denomination, whoever needs to see it. We give you everything that you need right within the ChurchTrac accounting system to help you cover all of your finances at your church, to not take them for granted, and to just steward this resource more wisely.
Absolutely.
So that's how you create a church budget.
It sounds pretty cut and dry to me.
It was a lot.
But with the right tools, though, Matt, I think there's a lot of success that can be achieved with this implementation of any church budget. I mean, and it's not just using the ChurchTrac platform. It's just getting a budget in place and utilizing that budget to provide you feedback of what your current status is.
Yes, absolutely. So go ahead, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video if you like this video. Let us know in the comments what you've been using for your church budget, and go ahead and create a free trial in ChurchTrac if you haven't already. Reach out to the support team with any questions that you have, especially if you are subscribed and you want to get into the accounting system and you need a little bit of help getting started. Lori's actually our support manager. So she's the one in charge of answering all of your questions and the team that helps do that. So reach out to us with any questions that you have. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a blessed day.
Bye.